question is just in the time that your book has been out, obviously there have been some people who generally agree with you, but have some pushback.
Yeah.
There have been some people that are absolutely outraged and disgusted by it.
Yeah.
There are some people that think it's beautiful, perfect.
Mm.
I'm wondering if you've gotten any people sort of in the camp of disagreeing mostly, but having some, like, it seems to me that the commentary I've seen on it has been largely in the net positive with some pushback or horrible. Nothing in the just like mildly disagreeing with it. And I was wondering if sort of personally you got any of that. And a close related question is, I've been thinking since our last Ask Me Anything about we thought about I asked you about Palestinian voices who disagree with you, but I was thinking more about how there weren't that many sort of Jewish voices who would disagree with you and be willing to speak with you publicly. And I was sort of thinking about maybe Jeffrey Sachs or Zach Beauchamp of Vox, or possibly Ezra Klein. Like, I think all of these people would be presumably be very happy to speak with you.
Yes. So that's a good question. I mean, I think Ezra Klein has just been too busy, or, you know, he tends to be more naturally focused on domestic issues. And he also now has a new book out. So wasn't able to get to do a conversation with him on his podcast, although I think you're right that he would have probably disagreed with me a little bit. Zach Beauchamp is someone I did have a conversation with a couple of years ago, but it was not a bad idea in the sense that he seems to me a little bit more still in that kind of two-state camp. I haven't necessarily seen what he's written recently, but I think he's someone I know a little bit, and I think that I think he would probably be maybe a little closer to where kind of J Street is. So that's a good suggestion. The third person you said was Jeffrey Sachs.
Jeffrey Sachs was the head of the Earth Institute at Columbia, but has also spoken a lot on Israel-Palestine, and I think shares a lot of your extremely harsh criticism of Israel's actions, not just in the West Bank, but including Israel proper.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny. I've tended to see him more in his commentary on on Ukraine and Russia, but that would be interesting too. Yeah, to see where his criticism would come, because I think he's been. He's become one of these people like Glenn Greenwald, I think, who in his kind of anti-interventionist foreign policy views is somehow now kind of playing some kind of bridge role between you could say the left and elements of the kind of Tucker Carlson right. I know he goes on Tucker Carlson a lot.
I wouldn't be surprised if you wouldn't agree on many other issues, foreign and domestic, including Israel-Palestine. But I just think there could be some really
no, those are interesting. Those are interesting suggestions. I think the other thing you were asking about was reviews. I think Brent Rosen's review might fall into the category of what you were thinking you hadn't seen, which is it's a pretty friendly review, but I think he at a certain point says kind of, if I remember correctly, the review kind of says this notion that Peter has that you're going to kind of maintain these communal relationships and these bonds is not realistic, or not necessarily a goal that we should prioritize, I think. So I think that's one that may fall into that category. But I don't know. It's you're right. I think that the reviews some of them have just been people who basically just completely reject my most basic premises, and then there's I don't know, there's I'm not exactly sure, kind of, there's some reviews that still haven't come out. So like the New York Times still hasn't come out with a review. I don't exactly know what's happening there. There hasn't been anything in the New York Review of Books. So there are a few places where you might get something a little bit like that. There was a bit of a strange review in a British magazine called Prospect, where the reviewer kind of said, Beinart's right about a lot of this stuff, but he's exaggerating the importance of this whole issue. It's not really as important to the world as he thinks it is, or something, which was also a kind of a strange, I thought, kind of criticism, but in a review that was fairly friendly. So those are a few that come to mind. Daniel, you mentioned that we have a few questions in the chat. Someone has suggested Bari Weiss. I'm pretty sure Bari Weiss will not do an event with me. I did do one event with her, kind of like a private event years ago, but this was before, I think, yeah, long before October 7th, and maybe before I came out for One State and before she had this kind of media conglomerate that she has now. So I suspect that she would not. I mean, I don't really think that, I don't think it really does her very much good, to be honest, to be in these conversations, because I don't think that in my sense of her as someone who kind of follows her stuff a little bit, I don't necessarily think that she's that kind of necessarily conversant about like stuff on the ground in Israel and Palestine. I think that and so I'm not necessarily sure that she would want to be drawn into that kind of conversation. That would be my guess. Plus, she would probably, she would get, I think, she would get attacked a lot by people who said that, why are you legitimizing this perspective? And so I think that it would be a lot easier for her just to not
Except
agree.
her website, the Free Press, does lean very hard. Their raison d'etre is supposedly to be open-minded to all viewpoints. So
yes, it's true, but what I noticed is that if you actually look, they do certain conversations. It's true, across, but I think, maybe like any publication within their understanding of what's a legitimate perspective. And I also think it's changed. So now I feel like, for instance, I noticed that they did one before the election with Ben Shapiro, who was arguing a pro-Trump perspective, and I think maybe Sam Harris was that atheist guy writing doing it. So I think it tells you something that for them, it's kind of like there's a legitimate debate about whether you think Trump is good or bad. But I don't think they would accept the idea that I don't think they would do a debate about whether DEI was good or bad. I think for them, that's kind of off. I think they would do it, their position would go from a kind of, let's say, centrist Democrat, never Trump position to a kind of a right-wing pro-Trump position. I think that's my sense of where they think, I think it's shifted, but I think on Israel, I've never seen anything that they have done that would suggest that they're really willing to countenance like a serious critique. Unfortunately, from my point of view. Daniel, what else do we have here?
Hi, Hassan asked, the first part of the ceasefire phase went so well in terms of exchange of captive prisoners. Why did it unravel so badly, and who gains from the turn for the worst?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess my understanding of it was that that Netanyahu didn't to go to the second phase would have really created a real political crisis for Netanyahu, because I think Ben-Gvir had already left the government. Smotrich had said he would leave the government if they went to a second phase. So that would mean that he no longer had a majority in the Knesset. I think they also are trying to pass a budget, which is often a moment at which Israeli governments fall. So I think it could have put his government in a lot of jeopardy. And since the second phase was going to require Israel, as I understand it, to withdraw its troops from Gaza. Yes, Ben-Gvir has come back now because the war is restarted, right? But that it would have basically been an admission of defeat for Netanyahu, right? You would have basically been admitting that you have not destroyed Hamas. And I think so then you're in a position where potentially your government is falling. You have to go to elections as you've kind of had to admit that your number one goal for the war hasn't been met. And the other number two goal, which was really getting the hostages out. I mean, they obviously a lot of the hostages ended up dying because the war lasted so long. So it just seems to me that Netanyahu always had a really strong political self-interest in not allowing this to happen. And to me, the question was whether the Trump administration was going to force Israel into some kind of continuation of the ceasefire, because Trump wants to get the U.S. hostages out, or has some of his own self-interest involved in being a peacemaker of some sort. So I don't know I haven't seen reporting which explains why why the Trump administration is allowing Netanyahu to do that. But it seems to me at some point that Netanyahu delayed for a few weeks what he wanted to do already, and now is going back to it, you know. I mean, it's obviously horrifying. I mean, it's horrifying for people in Gaza who are now starting to be, I mean, they were dying anyway because of, you know, the conditions there, but now are going to be dying because of the bombs that Israel's dropping again in really large numbers. And I also think it kind of signing a kind of death warrant for the hostages. In fact, I think I saw a link saying that there were a group of hostages, families that literally kind of gone to try to create some kind of human shield to try to stop the military from going into Gaza or something. And the father of the Bibas family, where those children were killed, that he publicly said that he's against this. But you know, that doesn't matter. That's not the political base of the Netanyahu coalition. It's not the hostage families, you know. So yeah, it's very, very, I mean, it's very, very grim.